Hey everyone, so I'm trying out a new camera setup where I wouldn't have to do any editing. So I tried this earlier and I got the video, but absolutely no sound, so I'm reshooting it. But before we get started, just like and subscribe so you'll see other updates to this. I'd like to talk about St. Joe today. It's my third biggest position and has been for a while. And rather than just do a deep dive into all the numbers, I'd like to talk about a general principle that I like to see in investing, which is what Warren Buffett's partner Charlie Munger likes to call a Lollapalooza effect. So, if you have these different mental models about how businesses work, and usually when you see an outsized performance on one of them, it's usually not the result of one aspect, but usually two or three different things overlapping. So, for instance, Warren Buffett's a great stock picker, and there are lots of hedge fund managers who are also great stock pickers, and some of them are worth $5 or $10 billion, and Warren is worth $100 billion. And he didn't get that way by being 10 times better than everyone else. He got that by having a business where he can invest the float for an insurance company. So the float basically is for a company like Geico, you buy car insurance this year, and it might be a year or two before you have an accident, and he gets to invest that money in the meantime and make money on it, and then he'll pay you back when you have an accident. So uh, for a hedge fund manager, they get to invest other people's money, and when the person makes money, they get to keep generally 20% of it. So that makes them billionaires. But rather than investing money that belongs to someone else and then you get to keep 20% of it, if you're dealing with insurance float, you get to invest money that is meant for somebody else. But when you make money on it, you keep 100% of it. So that's a great business model. So then you combine the two effects, which is him being a great investor and the effect of float, and those provide an outsized return because you have two factors, not one. And we'll talk about a couple of things that are going on with St. Joe that I think are overlapping to have this kind of force multiplier effect. So a little about the history of St. Joe. It started in the 1920s. A company, a railroad company, I believe it was in Kentucky, built railroad lines all the way down to the Panhandle because they wanted to take advantage of the opening of the Panama Canal, and they thought this is going to lead to a lot more business for the railroad if they had a depot there because where St. Joe is located in that Panhandle area, Port St. Joe. It is the closest uh, railroad hub. Sorry, it is the closest port in the U.S. to the Panama Canal. Now, I know some of you are thinking you don't know what you're talking about. Miami is obviously closer to Panama than uh, the Panhandle, but if you're thinking about as the crow flies, sure. If you take a plane from Panama, Miami is closer than Port St. Joe. But if you're taking a ship and you just imagine what the state of Florida looks like. It looks like a flaccid penis. And you can't go straight from Panama to the tip of there where Miami is. You have to go around the land that's in front of it, which is Cuba and Haiti and Dominican Republic. So when you steam around that, it adds nautical miles to it. So if you count the amount of nautical miles, Port St. Joe is closer than the port of Miami. So this company invested in railroad to track miles and a port, but things didn't work out. Something called the Great Depression happened, and business was bad all around, and they had to go into bankruptcy. And then the company was bought by the DuPont family and was run by one of the DuPont's brother in laws. So when it was run by the DuPont company, they saw all this land that was for sale, and they thought, well, we can buy up the land and use the trees and everything to start a paper company, which they did. and that operated up until profitably up until about the 1960s, and then they kind of stopped doing paper when uh, it didn't work out anymore, and sort of languished for a while, and then around 2010 is when the story gets interesting. So there was a investor who value investor, was very well known, called Bruce Berkowitz, who was very long this company, and there was an equally smart, well-known investor called David Einhorn, who was short this company. And if you're too early, sometimes it's the same as being wrong. And David Einhorn made a lot of money shorting this stock, but Bruce hung on for the next 10 years and was involved in the company, helping them with capital allocation and fixing up the balance sheet and doing things to make it a great company moving forward. So one of the things he did is he sold off a lot of the forest land that it had. So this at one point was the second largest private landowner in Florida. And they sold a lot of the forest land to other forest companies and the Mormon church, believe it or not. And what they kept was the 179,000 acres on the Florida Panhandle that's by the beach. And they thought they could develop this into high-end residential property. And that's where the story gets interesting. So they did what Berkowitz described as creating a fortress balance sheet so that they wouldn't be in need of debt financing or having to sell off valuable parcels when things took a downturn, as they eventually do in the real estate market, and made sure that they only spent things on what was necessary to run the business. So he described the prior way that they operated St. Joe as, spending money like a drunken sailor when times are good, and then burning the furniture to keep warm when times are bad. And he brought some capital discipline to that while he was on the board. They installed a new CEO. He managed the funds for them, in terms of investing the amount of money that they had in other things like bonds when it wasn't needed, and turned the operation around. So it's doing really well now. And then this got in my radar a few years ago. I was combing Datorama and looking at which positions large investors had conviction in terms of buying a lot of, and this one jumped out at me because I believe at one point it had been 90% of Berkowitz's portfolio, and I wasn't familiar with him at the time, but I looked up his record and some of the big ones he had with AIG and a few other companies, and then I dug further and further into this, and it looked really interesting to me. So we'll talk about the two or three Lollapalooza things that are overlapping now as sort of false force multipliers. One is the good capital allocator. So Berkowitz is a noted value investor, and he put a great CEO in place now, George Gonzalez, who's very shareholder focused, not willing to just do anything to grow the business. He wants to grow it profitably and only do things that are profitable and use the land um, to its best use whenever possible. Another big uh, obvious one is the growth in the state of Florida. So I've been going to Florida since the 90s when my dad moved down there. And for most of the 80s or 90s, it was the largest growing state in the United States. And currently it's number two, right behind Texas. And where St. Joe's assets are, Bay and Walton County are two of the fastest growing uh, counties in Florida. So, second highest growing state, uh, fastest growing counties. Those are one part of the force multiplier. Then you have the great capital allocator. And this got a big boost from COVID because when everything was tanking, and I actually made a mistake. I sold half my position thinking that I could buy it back cheaper. And COVID did hurt a lot of real estate companies, but it actually helped this one because a lot of people fleeing New York and California and other densely packed cities were buying up St. Joe properties, and rather than hurt St. Joe, this actually helped them. So the half that I had sold in the 20s, I was buying back in the 30s, which is fine because it was actually a better company back then. And just by way of reference, back in 2010, when this was not nearly as good a company, I believe Berkowitz's average price um, aggregate was about high 20s. So the fact that as recently as last quarter, St. Joe was able to buy back stock at 34, uh, given how much better the company is and what a boost that it got uh, from the lockdowns and people moving to Florida, I think speaks well of the company. And this is not investing advice. This is just me walking through my process. And on some of these uh, things that I invest in, I like to dig deep into the numbers, and some of the other ones you just need to step back and just take it all in. So on something like this, I think, is one of the things where you just take back and, as Warren Buffett said, if you see somebody who is, you know, 400 pounds, you don't need to know if he's like 437.8 pounds or if he's 399.2. Uh, you just can, in general, see that this guy's overweight. And sometimes when you step back and you sort of look at something, you just sort of see how much value there is there. And that's kind of what I saw here. So besides the fact that you're buying into the second fastest growing state, and this is beachfront property, which they're not making it anymore. Generally, with um, property developers, they have a few flaws in their model, and if you can invest in a company that has a way of overcoming those flaws, it can be very profitable. So it generally costs a lot to buy up a lot of land. And there's a company that's done really well called NVR. And what they did is, instead of buying a bunch of land and then developing it and then having to sell at fire sale prices if things go wrong, what they did is buy options on land, which increases the price that you're paying for the land because you have to pay for the option as well. But in good times, that's such a small part of the transaction that it doesn't matter. And in bad times, you don't have all your money locked up in land and need to sell it at fire sale prices because you're trying to sell when everyone else is trying to sell. So, what is St. Joe's way around spending a ton of money on land purchases and then selling the houses and then having to go out and buy more land? Their way around it is that this land was acquired in the 1930s for a dollar to an acre, in a lot of cases. And so it's not like they have to buy land, develop it, and then when they buy the neighboring plot because they want to develop it, they have to pay more money. They have all the land they need for the next 20 years, don't have to put any more money in. So uh, that's one way around that problem. Another interesting thing is that a lot of times you will never see a company like this because when something is dirt cheap, when people program their computers to look for things like low price to book or low PEs, it'll come up on everyone's radar and they'll get it before you do. But as I said, because this land was acquired in the 1930s, if you do a search for price to book, this looks outrageously expensive. And that's fine. You don't want people looking at what you're looking at. So we talked about the history of it and how cheap the land is. And there's another concept to think about called other people's money. So, we talked about how much money a hedge fund can make because they're investing other people's money and getting an override on that, and how much more Buffett makes because he's investing other people's money, the float, and getting 100% of that. But just think of in terms of development. In the city where I live, there used to be trolley cars, and the trolley cars weren't built by the city. The trolley cars were built by the property developers because in the 1800s or early 1900s, you were when there was no mass transit, people needed to get into the city to go to work. So if you bought this farmland right over the river and it was dirt cheap and you built a bunch of houses, you could make a lot of money on it. But the problem is, who would want to buy there if you can't get to work in the city where all the jobs are? So the developers would pay for the trolley cars themselves. And the trolley car businesses were privately owned. They were paid for by the developers, and they made so much on the houses that they were developing that it was more than enough to pay for the trolleys. Now, think if you had a farm that was next to that community where somebody had just built the trolley, and it's close enough to walk. Now your land is worth a lot more, and you didn't have to pay for that. So your neighbor made a lot on that farmland because he built that trolley, and you're making a lot on your land, but you're making more than him because you're benefiting from that trolley, but you didn't have to pay for it. So I think that's another part of the force multiplier in St. Joe, which is they're getting a benefit from a lot of things that they don't have to pay for. So if you remember back when they had the British Petroleum Gulf Coast Horizon disaster, and there was a big oil spill that contaminated a lot of coastal front areas in Florida. There was a settlement and a settlement fund. And as part of that fund, it was used to help coastal communities affected by this. And St. Joe has actually benefited from a lot of that money. So, uh, Port St. Joe, which, as I mentioned, is the closest port to the Panama Canal, got some redevelopment funds from that. And it wasn't a working port until recently, but they had uh, a port and a rail spur, and they had customers who wanted to utilize it. So some of the funds were used to dredge the port. And initially, they asked to get it to 50 something feet so it could be a deep water port for all kinds of dry bulk. But I guess there wasn't enough money available, and they agreed to dredge it to 35 feet, and it was done by the Army Corps of Engineers. And as I said, this money from the settlement fund was used to pay for that. So now there's this 35 foot port that they can be used for dry bulk, and there was an existing rail spur there, and they already have customers that ship wood pulp to Europe, I believe. So they got the benefits of uh, a port, but without having to pay for a lot of what you would need to get it usable. So the dredging is very expensive, but somebody else paid for it. And now, if you think about what's going on in the rest of their territory in the Panhandle, the original airport in the area had grown, and it needed to grow, sorry, bigger, but there was already stuff around it, so you couldn't really expand, and they needed a new airport. So what St. Joe did is they donated the land for the airport to the county. They got a tax deduction, and now St. Joe owns all the land around the airport. So the airport was built. They're going to benefit from the airport because if you want to build a Holiday Inn next to the airport, if you want to build commercial stuff for a Sky Chef or for a Hertz Rent-A-Car or anything else that's next to the airport, you have to go through St. Joe now because they own all the property around it. And so, again, this is it's very expensive to build an airport, and somebody else paid for this, and they got the benefit of it. And another thing that's common for developers to do is either they'll donate land or sell it dirt cheap so that you can build a hospital or a fire department or anything like that. And they'll get the benefit of that because people won't move to a community if there aren't high schools and hospitals and things like that. So they donated the land to build a STEM high school to make it more attractive for people to move to the area. And again, the county is going to build the high school, and they also paid for building part of the roads. So generally, the developer has to pay for the roads, and the agreement was we'll pay for part of it, you pay for part of it. And again, they're getting the benefit of this because now it's a more attractive place for families to move. You know, you wouldn't want to move to a place that has terrible school systems. This has a model STEM school, and uh, you're getting the benefit of that. Somebody else built it and also helped pay for the roads for it. There's also an interesting development where they've partnered with Margaritaville, which is a company that's affiliated with Jimmy Buffett, not Warren Buffett, and it's very popular with seniors. So the first community they did sold out, second community sold out, and they can replicate this as many times as they want. And there's a builder, Minto, I believe is called, that's building these communities. And Margaritaville is selling it to people, and they're building the houses, and it's a joint partnership with Joe. So somebody else is putting up the money, and you're benefiting from that because not only are you getting money from this property, as I said, it makes the property all around it, which they still own, more profitable, more valuable, and they sell the lots to build houses, but St. Joe gets to keep lots that they hold back, and then they can put up hotels, they can put up commercial, they can put up offices, and other people are paying to develop this, and they get stuff that's worth more and more over time. So really well run company, buying into Florida growth. They have very unique partnerships where um, other people are spending the money, they get the benefit, either the state or their partners with Latitude Margaritaville. Another thing that they have going for them is they don't have that flaw in their model, which many developers do, which is, you buy up land and develop it, and then you got to use that land to buy up more land, but the land went up in value because of what you've already done. They own all the land that they're going to need for the next 10 or 20 years. And this flywheel is just going to go from there. So that's basically what I saw in St. Joe, and I invested in it. At the time, I believe the enterprise value was about like 1.8 billion or something like that. And if you think, well, they have 179,000 acres, and at the time, I believe farmland for oranges was selling for $10,000 an acre. So I doubted that anyone would use that for farmland, but I thought if they're developing that land, they can at least get $10,000 an acre for land that's close to the beach. And anything more than that, they're going to make money because 179,000 times 10,000, you get uh, almost 1.8 billion, which is what the was selling for. So even if you break even on the land, $10,000 an acre, you'll still keep back some lots, and then you'll make money from all the commercial stuff. And more realistically, if you're making 20 or 30 or $40,000 an acre, you can do very, very well on this. But I thought they don't owe any money. Uh, uh, it's very unlikely that they would lose money on this, and they have this unique model where they have all the land they'll ever need. Other people are paying and they're benefiting from it, and you got great capital allocation, and you're in a fast-growing state. So I thought it's one of those things where it was impossible to break it. And the usual arguments, well, what about global warming? What about hurricanes? Um, it's 12 to 30 feet elevation versus Miami, which is kind of sea level. So in Miami, there are some private islands off there, like Star Islands, where the houses are worth tens of millions of dollars, and they're having problems because of rising sea levels. So if you've got your sewer pipe, it's half filled with water and half filled with half filled with air and half filled with and then the water rises. You got a little bubble in there, puts upward pressure, and it snaps the pipe. So you have people with $20 million houses who don't have working plumbing, and that's not a problem that you're going to have in the Panhandle because of the elevation. What about hurricanes? Hurricanes is a problem you have in any part of Florida, but you get hit with a lot more hurricanes in South Florida than you do in North Florida. And at the time, a couple of years ago, a Category 5 hurricane hit St. Joe and only did about $4 or $5 million worth of damage, if I recall, because even though it hit Mexico Beach, direct hit Category 5, it's pretty hard to destroy dirt. And that's what they had. And once a house is built and it's up to new hurricane codes, where it's concrete block and everything like that, it would be fine. But at the time, all their inventory was dirt, and you can't destroy dirt. It can only go up from there. And I know a lot of people like to look at St. Joe two ways. One is with an Excel spreadsheet where you count every permit and count every sale and get it down to the penny. And the people that do that, half of them think it's worth a lot, and half of them think you're buying swampland. And then there's the back of the envelope people, same thing. Some of them look at it and say, well, it's worth nothing, and some of it say it's worth a lot, and I'm in the latter pile. Uh, What about the short sellers? I think the uh, David Einhorn short thesis doesn't apply anymore because they've got rid of all the um, woodland and assets like that that aren't worth a lot, and they kept the beachfront stuff, which is worth a lot. And there are some lots that they're getting like free $400,000 an acre now. So definitely more than the 10,000 that I said. You just have to beat that 1 foot hurdle. And the most recent short report I saw was from a hedge fund called Kerrisdale. And I'm not slamming them. I'm sure they've made more money investing than I have. But when somebody asked me about that short report, I wasn't convinced by it. And when I looked up Kerrisdale's latest 13Fs, they are no longer short St. Joe. They are long St. Joe. So I don't put much weight in that short report because they don't even put weight in that short report, and they wrote it and now they're long. So again, this is not a recommendation to buy or sell. You got to do your own work, but sometimes with something like a natural gas pipeline or a refinery, I'll take out a pencil and paper and try to figure out exactly what it's worth. And because I don't want to be wrong on that, but sometimes on some companies like this, you just have to step back and look at the big picture and say, you know, if this is the rocket ship and somebody's offering me a ticket, maybe I should get on. And that was my thought on that. So this is my third biggest position. The first two are Berkshire and Google, and one is like 600 or 700 billion now, and the other is 1.2 trillion. And this is very small. It's like 3 billion. So why would I be so confident in a company that's a lot smaller? One is, if you're looking inside your circle of competence, as I said, I've been going to Florida since the 90s. Before I was a lawyer, I worked in construction. So I know how profitable buying and flipping houses or just buying a house and sitting on it can be. And just all these little overlapping force multipliers that create that Lollapalooza that Charlie Munger talks about. I think, you've got the growth of Florida, you've got benefiting from other people's money, you've got all the land you'll need for the next 20 years, and you've got a great capital allocator. I think all those things come together, and you just have to set back. And, even if you don't, as Buffett said, you don't know exactly how much that guy weighs, but he looks like he's fat. I feel like there's a lot of meat on this bone. And I'm not telling you to buy, I'm not telling you to sell. This is just me walking through my process to make sure that if I'm looking at this in the future and deciding whether to buy or sell, I don't commit the sin of thesis creep. So I think that's it for today. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and see you soon. Bye.